I want to welcome everyone to Book Carnival. My name is Anne Saller, and we're from Orange, California. And tonight we are delighted to have two lovely ladies with us. Sandra Brown is here with her newest book, which I have here. And I don't think it's going to show because I'm in a very tiny square. There we go.
Shows well enough.
And we have Kate White, who is going to be introducing her, who also had a new book come out in June. And I apologize that I don't have that up here for you. And we're going to hold questions until they're finished visiting with each other and sharing all the details with us. And then we'll open it up for questions. Enter any question you have in the chat room at any time. And then we'll be feeding that to them. And so, Sandra and Kate, it's all yours. Welcome.
Wow. Thank you, Anne. Well, I was actually told somebody else was going to introduce Sandra, but I just happened to have a bio of hers in my trusted hands. So can I just first say that I can still remember the first Sandra Brown book I read and how it blew me away. So this is such an honor for me. She is the author of 72 New York Times bestsellers. There are more than 80 million copies of her books in print worldwide and translated into 34 languages. Wow. Four of her books have been made into movies. In 2008, she was the International Thriller Writer. They named her its Thriller Master. And she has served as president of Mystery Writers of America and holds an honorary doctorate of human letters from Texas Christian University. And of course, she's based in Texas. Sandra, this is such a treat for me. Thank you
for
giving me this opportunity.
So much. I appreciate it, Kate. You're very gracious. And when I heard that they were asking you to do this, I was like, oh my gosh. I remember the day I met you. Do you remember we were in a tent in Bryant Park
Right.
in New York City doing a panel at a book festival? And they lost electricity and all the lights went out. Do you remember
yes.
that?
Well,
that was the first time we met. And I don't even want to think how many years ago that was.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
You were wonderful then, and you're still wonderful. And thank you for doing this, truly.
Oh, I'm thrilled. And I've got my copy too of Blind Tiger, which I devoured. I know the participants have bought the book and most of it, but so we can hear it in your own words and do that. Can you just sum it up for us, this fabulous new book of yours?
Well, it started, the idea started last year when I was in lockdown during COVID. And I thought, every night watching the news was like taking a beating with a chain. I mean, it was just awful. Everything was terrible. It wasn't just the pandemic, but it was all of the politics. It was just so many bad things. So I was thinking about what am I going to write next? And I thought, I need escapism. I need a departure from what I was being inundated with. So I thought, what was happening 100 years ago? Excuse me. And what appeared to be such an innocent time, 1920, turned out to be no different from 2020. They had a global pandemic of Spanish flu. They had a Me Too movement, except it was for suffrage. And they had soldiers returning from a very unpopular First World War with post-traumatic stress, but they hadn't even named it yet. And on top of everything else, you couldn't even buy a drink because in January of 1920, Prohibition had gone into effect. So I thought, now Prohibition, I don't, you don't hear a lot about that. You don't see a lot about that. So I started kind of, noodling that idea, and I looked up Prohibition in Texas, and of course, we did it better than everybody. And little did I know that the moonshine capital of Texas was a small town about 50 miles from where I've lived all my life. And I never knew this story. So I started digging in that. And when I compiled all this research, I called my editor and I said, "You're going to think I'm crazy." But thought I would do a historical. And so the more we talked about it, the more enthusiastic he became. And I said, I really think that readers need a departure from what we're being so inundated with in our contemporary society. And if I feel that way, I have to think a lot of readers would too. So he went for the idea, and that's where Blind Tiger came about. So it is about Prohibition in its early days. This is 1920 in Texas. It's not affiliated with Chicago and New York and some of the cities that you think of, the Al Capones and the people that really put Prohibition on the map. These are farmers who had to put food on the table. And because their cotton crops had failed and their corn crops had failed, they thought, what can we do with this corn? Oh, we can make
Right.
So that's where it came from.
Wow. When I was reading the book, one word that just kept coming to mind was cinematic, because it has such an incredible sweeping story. It has these incredibly compelling characters. And as you say, it's got this setting and time frame that's really unique. And when you say that you really started thinking first about the time frame, Prohibition, and the moonshine capital of the United States in Texas, is that what came first for you? And is that usually the case where you're thinking about setting and plot? Because you've also got this or setting and time frame, because you've also got this amazing story and these amazing characters. So what generally comes first for you, and then how do you layer in the other elements? Like in this case, if it did start with the idea of, I want to talk about this period 1920 in the US, how then did you do the characters and the story? How did those layer in?
Well, I started with, Kate, most of my books, the last 20 years, have been told from the male point of view. And I don't particularly know why that is. But I think it's because I'm on the inside looking out at the male character. So I really kind of started with Thatcher, and I thought, well, he could be a soldier returning from war. And since I thought Texas, he could be a cowboy, because this is really when the roaring 20s kind of met the old West. I mean, it was an evolution of the what we perceive from all the movies as the old West, the Wild West. And so I thought, what if he were a component of that, but suddenly, having to deal with issues of the 20th century, the women's suffrage, the return of people from war. And, when World War I started, lots of women took the jobs
Right.
of these hundreds of thousands of men who left the job market to go fight the war. So when the war was over, the men were then unemployed, and the women were like, we like this, we like not having to wash and iron and cook only. We like going to work every day and having that sense of independence. So it was a real a revolutionary time in our country. And so I thought, well, if Thatcher was put in that world, so I kind of started with him. But then I thought, if my heroine's a woman of that age, she has to be a gutsy Sandra Brown heroine. She has to be the heroine that seizes the bull by the horns. So I really put her in a pit and threw rocks at her for the first third of the book. And she fights back. And I wanted her to be a very strong, independent, forward-thinking woman, while at the same time making her likable and showing that she did have that soft side. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done this with your characters. I know you. Please tell me you have. Where you
Well-
kind of paint yourself into a corner, and you start out with them one way, but then you're thinking, but are they likable? Is this a character that the reader is going to identify with? So I tried to show her softer side with her relationship with her father-in-law, the way, she grieves, the embrace with which she took in the prostitute who had been abused, with no judgment whatsoever. And so I tried to show her softer side, while at the same time, she is strong. She is going to make it. She's not going to depend on anyone else for her well-being from that point forward.
Yeah, as a writer, I've always been intrigued with how you do male characters and make them the protagonist, because that's not typical. Laurel is an amazing character. You are drawn to her right from the beginning, without giving anything away. She's very much from the beginning. She's living with her father-in-law, who she had only just met at Earth, and then Thatcher comes into the picture. And what they all have in common is that you touched on this a little bit, is that they're flawed, but they're likable. And why is that such an important characteristic, do you think, for readers? Is it because they relate to that, they see that in themselves? And is that a tricky balancing act for you, to be able to make a character not have the right amount of flaws to be relatable, but not the kind of flaws that are going to make you reject them?
Well, confession time here. I had written, I don't know, 10 or 15 chapters, and Thatcher, in my mind, was kind of like, and nobody else will remember this person but me, but like a young Gary Cooper. He was like the very stoic, cowboy type who lived by that cowboy code. And he was taciturn. He wasn't showy, flamboyant in any way. But if you messed with him, you were going to be in trouble. Well, my first draft, I had him, I thought, too much one way. So I rewrote the scene in the boxcar where he demonstrates immediately he's not a character that goes looking for trouble, but you do not mess with him. If backed into a corner, he's willing to do what is necessary to protect himself, and I also think to protect the people that he cares for. So I had to go, because he was almost too much of a good guy, and I was thinking, no, I need to have him show that edge earlier on. So I rewrote, as I do every scene like 40 times, but I rewrote that boxcar scene to let us see that spark, that spark of violence if it's called for. But ordinary, and then I've already addressed the issue with Laurel, was making her strong and at the same time showing a softness and a vulnerability, given the circumstances. And it is a balance. And as a writer, how you want to make your, I mean, I think one of the best examples truly is Frederick Forsyth's The Jackal.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
He is an assassin. He is the worst individual you can imagine. He makes lots of money for killing people. He is iceberg. He is an iceberg, and yet you cannot wait to see what he does next.
Exactly.
And there's this perverse thing, I think, in all of us. It's like, go Bonnie, go Clyde. You kind of, in a way, want to see them get out of their dilemma, even knowing that what they're doing is wrong. So I think sometimes, even though the characters are flawed and they're doing the wrong thing, and you see them making mistakes, but that's what part of the reading experience is about, is like, oh no, don't do this, because you're pulling for them.
Yeah, the Day of the Jackal is such a perfect example. I felt the same way you did. You mentioned already a few of the really compelling you bring into the book, like the hot mess of prohibition, which was the rule of the land in 1920. Sounded like a good idea, but turned out not to be.
No.
And then you deal with political corruption, but you also have such moving personal themes in the book too. The obligation we have to family, because Laurel, she is fabulous to Irv, her father-in-law, who she has never known, and to her friends. And then we have grief, which is so profound in the book. But one of the ones I think that meant the most to me as a woman was just Laurel's need to take the reins of her own life. And that's, of course, the Sandra Brown theme. But why is that such an important theme for you, Sandra? It's something that is very much a part of why I love your books. But even in a book set in 1920, Laurel, as you said, took the bull by the horns.
Yeah, well, I thought, as I was telling my editor, I wanted to make the book relevant to what was going, and the parallels between 1920 and 2020 were uncanny. It was like things really haven't come that far. We haven't learned, women got the vote, but women are still, having to stand up for themselves in different circumstances. And of course, that can swing too far the other way too. But it's like, if I wanted to make the statement that, and I told my daughter this, I said, it's great, that you love your husband, that, you have this family and everything. And at this point in your life, you wanted to stay at home with your boys, 3 boys, and raise them and everything, but always be able to support yourself. Always have something that is uniquely yours that you can depend on. And she was a businesswoman and has lately sold her business, but she's a very strong person on her own, and she's still a loving wife and mother. But I think there is a way to integrate those two ideals. But I wanted to make the point that in 100 years, women still have to, in some ways, assert themselves, because it's not taken for granted that they're going to support themselves. It's not taken for granted that they're capable of doing that. And it should be by now, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. What was it like to write a historical novel after so many contemporary ones? I mean, you not only dealt with the time frame, but there are all these little things in the books, like potbelly stoves and ice boxes and aspirin powder and ether and garters.
Right.
Did it take an incredible amount of research for you to do it? And was that a fun part for you?
Well, it really was a fun part. And it was by far and away the book I have had to research the most, because I'll just give you one quick example. I had Laurel floorboarding her Model T. And that was when I was just writing the story. Then I went back and I had to learn, how do you drive a Model T? I had no idea. And so I did all the research, and I went, there are 3 pedals. There's the clutch, there's reverse in the middle, and then on the right is the brake. And I went, where's the accelerator? Well, the accelerator was actually on the steering wheel. You gauged your speed by these levers on the steering wheel. So I went, well, can't say she floorboarded it because that wouldn't be correct. So it was little things like that. But I have to say, I loved the research, and I loved the change of pace. I loved writing a book where nobody had a cell phone, because I think cell phones have ruined suspense and thriller novels, because it's hard to make people, it's hard to make people disappear. You can't do it anymore.
Right.
And so I loved that liberty of them being kind of out of communication. And in every book, every Sandra Brown book, I tried to create a microcosm, a little world where the rest of the world is just kind of a satellite, but this little world is where every human trait is represented. And it's hard to do when you're writing in contemporary times now, because we're so inundated. I mean, the whole world lives with us. And I loved being able to put those people in that town, and really what's going on around, is kind of just out there. They're there to solve their world problems, but it's a small world. I loved that.
Yeah. I was thinking when I was reading it, I'm not sure why this popped into my head, but just because the book made me really feel like I was in 1920 in the moonshine capital of the world. And it reminded me years ago, because I was in the magazine business, I interviewed Meryl Streep when she was doing Sophie's Choice. And she told me this funny story about how when she was doing accents, and in Sophie's Choice, she had to do a Polish accent, she would keep the accent going when she was at home. And she had a 2-year-old little boy then, her first child. And one day he said to her, "Mommy, no speak Poli, no speak Poli." And I was wondering, was your husband telling you anything similar? Because how you must have been so immersed in that time frame where did you feel like you were living it in your head at times when you weren't writing?
A lot of the time I actually got stuck during the first 2 months of the COVID lockdown. I was in our place in South Carolina, and he was in Texas. And so we couldn't get to each other. Airline driving took 2 days, so we didn't want to do that. And so he said, just stay there and write. So I got so totally immersed. You talk about immersed. I write 10 hours a day. But when I got home, I was so excited, and he was so excited, because God bless him. He's been a great partner all these years. We were married before I ever started writing. So he's been my champion, all these years. But he could tell just by how I talked about it. I would start in on these tangents, and I'd get so caught up. And so, because I was excited, he was very excited for it.
I have a confession to make. I kind of lusted over Thatcher. He is just one heck of a guy. Right. I mean, I liked the right from the boxcar scene. I knew he was unafraid, but there was something very much about him that you could see where Laurel was attracted to him. He wasn't too macho. One of the things that intrigued me about him is he really reads people very well.
Right.
That's one of his gifts, one of his superpowers. Is that something that you feel you do really well too? Are you a great reader of people, or is there someone in your life you modeled that after?
I'm a great observer. I think I have a gift of perception. Just perceiving when someone's really sad, even just emotions. But I'm a great observer, and as a fiction writer, I'm sure you feel the same way. I'll see a situation, in a public place, in an airport, in a grocery store, whatever. See people in some kind of dialogue, and I'm going, wonder what's going on there. I'm nosy. And I think you have to be. I think you have to be an observer of people to be a fiction writer. And what I loved about Thatcher, even though he was not a super educated man, he'd grown up on a cattle ranch in the panhandle of Texas in the late 1880s when the cowboy life was disappearing as they knew it at that point in time. There was a lot of depth to him. He had a depth about him, and he observed people, and he could read people, and he says, I have a knack. And that was kind of his, I have a knack. And sometimes it was good, and sometimes it wasn't, because he could see the good in people, but he could also see the bad in people.
Right.
Long before anyone else did. And so it was like, in a way, it was a curse to him. But I'm glad you liked him. I kind of liked him too.
Yeah, it was almost, I liked him almost illegally. Before we turn it over back to Anne, because I know there are questions coming in. Just mentioning your husband, it reminded me of something I heard you say once, that because you just pointed out that you weren't a writer when you met your husband. And you said once that he kind of dared you. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it'd be interesting for anyone who doesn't know how this all came to be, these 80 million books around the world.
Well, I really do have to credit him, because he did dare me in a way. We were both working for the ABC television affiliate in Dallas, WFAA, and he was a full-time news reporter, and I was kind of a part-time. I was working on a show called PM Magazine. And one day they came in and they fired all the PM Magazine contributors. So, and I had babies, and I had my 2 children at home, and I loved the role of, wife and mother. But all of a sudden, I didn't have that creative outlet, that thing I was talking about earlier, that thing that was my own, that sustained something inside me. And Michael at that point said, you really have always talked about writing fiction, and now you've got time and opportunity to do it. So are you going to keep talking about it, or are you going to do it? And he bought a card table and a IBM Selectric typewriter. This is how far back it goes. And set it up in the spare room. And I started writing. And he has been my #1 fan and #1 bolster and supporter all these years later. It's been 40 years this year since I was first published.
Wow.
I know, I can't
Wow.
believe that.
So I'm going to turn it back over to Anne because I know there are questions coming in. So Anne, do you want to share some of the questions so that Sandra can answer them?
Absolutely. Let me get back up to the beginning here. One person asked, what are your favorite flaws for Thatcher and Laurel, or for any of your heroes and heroines?
Favorite flaws. I think they have to recognize by the end of the book, you want a character to have an arc, that they realize something about themselves. And I think in most instances, in a Sandra Brown book, I think they have to recognize a vulnerability, that they are not invincible, that they may have made a mistake, that they have to own up to that, or confront something in their past that they did that changed the course of their life, and they have to reconcile that. And at that point, let it go. I think it's important for people to be able to forgive themselves, to say, that was a bad thing, but either I can let it control my life or I can let it go. And so I would say that would be the most important flaw, but in a way that's a virtue. But that's a way to answer that question, is that I would like for them to recognize a failure or a wrong decision, but then to forgive themselves.
Okay, wonderful. Someone else wants to know what your thoughts and feelings on having your stories converted to audiobooks.
Oh, I love that. I have had great readers, and this past year, Jason Culp is the reader of Blind Tiger, and he has done. He's been doing this for years, and he's done so many wonderful books, and I love the narration that he gave Blind Tiger, and he even produced a little video to promote it, and it was great. And so many people tell me, say, I can't read so well anymore, or I travel a lot, or I commute, and so audiobooks is a continuing growing market, I think, for that reason. And I'm very grateful to my narrators, Victor Slazak, Stephen Lang, Jason Culp. All of them have done amazing jobs on narrating my books.
And did you have any say in the selection?
Yeah, I get auditions for these actors are so coveted, and sometimes they're not available, so we have to try another one. And so sometimes schedules don't permit them, to do it. But yes, I am given choices.
That's wonderful. This is a little bit of a long one. It says, in your novel Standoff, some time ago in 2000, a good portion of the story happens in one location in the convenience store.
Mm-hmm.
Was that intentional, or did it develop that way?
No, it was intentional. Standoff was a particular book because it was written specifically for the Doubleday and Literary Guild Book Club. And the overseer of those two book clubs came to me and he said, what about writing an original book just for the book clubs? And I said, oh, that'd be great. And so he gave me a word length and he said, okay, whatever you want to do. And I thought, what if I could write a book that it would transpire over the amount of time that it would take to read it? So I was thinking about 8 to 12 hours. So I thought, what would go on during that period of time? And I thought, a standoff. And So that's where I started. And so I wrote it to where a person could read it in about the amount of time that it covers. So that was intentional. Thank you for remembering.
Oh, that's fascinating. We've got some more here. Whoops. Got, well, that was that one. I'm flopping around here a little bit. For the writers in the group, on average, how long does it take to write one of your books? And are you a plotter or a pantser? Always a favorite question.
Well, I know Kate will probably answer this totally differently because every single writer has their own method.
Exactly.
I kind of know when I start what my starting point is going to be and where I'm going to end. So I know where I'm going, but I have no idea how I'm going to get there. And I plan spikes in the story where I know there has to be a flip. And that something has to switch. So I might plan like 3 or 4 spikes, but here again, I don't know how I'm going to get to each one of them. I just know that that's my kind of next goal, to get to that. And then after that flips, then where the next one is going to come. But I like to put the characters into terrible trouble as soon as possible. And then let them kind of figure it out. They're always smarter than I am. And so I kind of like to come to work every day and wait to see what's going to happen. So I'll let Kate answer and say how she does. So I kind of am in between. I kind of know where I'm going, but don't know how I'm going to get there.
Okay, can I just ask Sandra, because you said something so interesting with a flip, do you mean like a reversal or a surprise that the character has to deal with?
Yeah. And most of the time, I mean, I plan something and I do use those as kind of tent poles, along the way, but also some of the best plot twists in books have shocked the heck out of me. I'll be writing and go, oh, that's great. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And so I love when that happens.
Yeah. Joe Finder, who we both know, he's a terrific thriller writer.
Yes.
He once told me he keeps a little post-it on his laptop that says surprise, reveal, or reversal to remind him of those. For me, I'm not a pantser. I refuse to be called a pantser, so therefore I don't want to be a pantser. But I always know, because I respect to them, and in my latest, The Fiance, that's the case. And so I know who the killer is, why they killed, how I'm starting out. But like you, I love to be surprised along the way. I plot about 4 or 5 chapters at a time. And that's the magic of writing, as you said, Sandra, where all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, I had no idea that was going to happen. How did my brain do that?
Right. And I think sometimes when I'm stuck and the characters are looking at me like, tell us what to do. We're out of ideas. And sometimes that can last for, a week or two. And I'll go back and I'll rewrite. I'll try and polish what I've already done. And eventually I'll wake up one morning and go, well, why was that so hard? It seems so obvious, that's the obvious answer. But and so sometimes it's kind of scary. And I'll sit down with my notepad and go, what do I know? And I underline the word know. What do I know? And I write it down. What does this character want? What's preventing this character from getting what he wants? And, the playwright, David Mamet, is so amazing. And he has, for every scene, should ask 3 questions. What do you want? What happens if you don't get it? Why now? And every scene, I try and go back and say, are those 3 questions in that scene? What does the character want? What happens if he doesn't get it? And why now? And that just gives an immediacy to every scene, and it makes it imperative. You know, if you've got all the time in the world, if a character can languish, the reader's going to languish, you know, so it can't be tomorrow. It's got to be right now. So just little tricks that, you know, that I apply. And I didn't think them up. Somebody smarter than I did thought them up.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. We have to have a toolbox, just like any other field, right?
Yeah.
One other question here is, since you've done this historical fiction and obviously enjoyed it so much, are you considering any future ones?
Yes.
We're going to be coy about this.
But I don't intend to be coy. Kate can relate to this. There are a lot of, you know, players, and it's not my decision alone, except it really is. But it a lot of things to take into consideration. But I must say that the reaction to Blind Tiger thus far has been very affirming, and I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the change of pace, and so I think maybe, you know, Ken Follett is doing this wonderful historicals. Other colleagues of mine this year have done historicals, and so I think we're all kind of looking for a fresh approach to telling our stories. And no matter when the story's set, and as a reader, I think I speak for most really dedicated readers. I don't care if a book is set on a spaceship or a covered wagon. I just want to know the story. And the stories that Shakespeare wrote are as relevant today as they were then, because the human condition, passion, lust, greed, jealousy, bravery, you know, cowardice, all of those things still exist. And so if you appeal to the human emotion, it's a universal theme. And so I think whatever the story is, if you captivate your reader with characters they care about, they're going to follow you.
Well, personally, I have to say I've read you for years and enjoyed every book you've written. And what I've admired most is you've always developed unique characters. There was nothing copied from another book. There was nothing that related. Your characters stood alone in each novel. And they were refreshing and they were interesting and I cared. And I think that's just remarkable.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's see if we have any more questions over here.
I have one I wanted to sneak in that touched on something, Sandra, you just said, that part of the job of a writer today who's writing popular fiction has to be to pay attention to the marketplace. And Ken Follett, Lisa Scottolini, there are people writing historical thrillers and historical novels, and it's something that you pay attention to. And I wonder what else that you may have adjusted over time in how you write a book or approach a book, just based on the changing marketplace. One of the things I love about Blind Tiger, that first chapter, it's got me nervous as I'm reading it. There's a lot going on, but I didn't see that last page coming. It's like, whoa. And you had grabbed me by the lapels with the first chapter. And that today we have to do because of the attention span of readers. Yes. What are some of the other things you've adjusted over 72 books that over these 40 years that you feel are different, a little bit different than when you were writing 20, 30, 40 years ago?
Well, I learned very early to get right into the story. And how I learned that is by doing it wrong. My first book I did, it was a romance called Love's Encore. And it turned out okay. In reprint, it became a New York Times bestseller. But when I wrote it, I did the wrong thing. I tried to show off how smart I was by, taking the reader on this, geographical journey, and it went on for like 7 pages of the country road and the scenery and the kind of trees that were growing and all of this stuff that I knew. And then I got to page 7 and the heroine walks in and the hero says something and I thought in later years, that's where I should have started the book. That was where something happened. And I even used that example on a panel one time. And it was about plotting, getting into the plot. And I said, this writer, and I explained it just as I have to you. And then I said, and I should have started the book right there. And so I think that one thing I learned was don't show off. The best research is the invisible research. I had to know how to make moonshine. I had to know how still worked. I had to know how a Model T, but I didn't depart from the story. I don't think I didn't intentionally depart from the story and fill the reader in on this is how it came across in the story. It came across in dialogue. So I get sort of irritated with a writer when I'm so engrossed in the story and then they take a time out and explain everything, because if it needs explaining, it can be done in another way. That's one thing I've learned. And I learned it because I did it wrong.
I'm taking some notes here.
But another thing, and this was the best advice I think I ever got. My first editor was a woman named Vivian Stevens, and she bought my first 5 books for a line of romances for Bantam Doubleday Dell, and called Ecstasy Romance. And I had heard that she was starting a line of romances. A bookseller whom I'd met at a cocktail party at a writer's conference had said, send me a manuscript and I'll tell you whether or not it's any good. And so when I had a manuscript, I sent it to her and she said, I think this woman named Vivian Stevens is looking for exactly this. I'm going to send her your manuscript. She bought my book. So I was always writing with a little bit of a tragic edge. There was always an underlying, there came along a humor. It was like banter, Spencer Tracy kind of, Katharine Hepburn kind of, that dialogue. And everybody was just raving about all these books with humor in it. And so I said, what should I do? Should I try to start incorporating, more humor into the story? And she's to follow the trend, as you were saying, to follow the trend. And she said, Sandra, do what you do. Just do it better than everybody else. And so it was like, focus on what you do, develop your voice and stick to it. And when you really look at all of the writers who have remained successful over decades, Dean Koontz, Stephen King, John Grisham, Anne Rice, I mean, all of these wonderful authors, they do their thing. and they do it better than anybody else.
Right. And
Yes.
do you have any other questions?
Just one more here. Someone wants to know what your thoughts are, Sandra, on promoting through social media, Zoom and book signings.
Well, I think I love sitting here. It's almost 10 o'clock my time. Kate, it's an hour later for you. I've got on my yoga pants. So in that regard, these Zoom and virtual events are great because we can reach a lot of people. And if they're recorded and they're, up there on the internet for a long time, that's great. I really desperately miss getting to meet my readers and shaking their hands and listening to what they want to tell me. On this, I'm a talking head. But I really love, and I don't think anything can replace that connection, because I know how, when I've met my favorite writers, sometimes I make a blithering idiot out of myself. I mean, I can't speak because that person's work has meant so much to me on a personal level. And so it really means a lot to me when a reader comes up and says, "You'll never know how much this book meant to me." And so I don't think there's any replacement for that.
No, I agree totally. I think we've covered all the questions. Is there anything else? Kate?
What I'd love to do, Sandra, if you don't mind, I know you must get asked this a lot, but I could tell from some of the questions that there might be some possibly aspiring authors, and just so many of these kinds of talks when I was starting out, because I wanted to learn about the process from other authors. And you've probably answered this a lot, but you write 10 hours a day. You say, can you just tell us a little bit before we conclude about your schedule, your day, how you keep your beautiful butt in the chair for those 10 hours? And do you seduce yourself in some ways by every hour you get a cup of tea or light a scented candle, or how do you do it? Can you share that with any aspiring authors, and myself included here?
Well, I think you have to be prepared to go into the torture chamber every day. And even when, I'm big on creature comfort. I always have something growing, or fresh flowers, scented candles, all of that. But the bottom line is, and I was asked not too long ago, before COVID, but not too long before COVID, on a panel shared with a lot of writers who were all a lot younger than I. And one asked me, "What really, do you have a word of advice?" And I said, "Well, it would be a question, and that is, how hard do you want to work?" Because this is the glamorous part, this is the glamorous part. But most days, I'm sitting here at this keyboard and I'm facing a wall of fear, that whatever talent, if that's even, I don't even like that word, but whatever talent I may have possessed has abandoned me, in the night. And every day, I wish I were better. Every day, I wish that what were up here could get through my fingers to the keyboard. And so you have to, if you aspire to do this, you have to be willing to work really, really hard, and give up a lot of things in order to do it, because it's not for sissies.
And the results show.
That's yeah. Well, Sandra, I just want to say how thrilled I was to be able to spend this time with you. I loved your book, Blind Tiger. As I said in the beginning, it's it's the trifecta. It has an amazing sweeping story that we're riveted to. It has the most wonderful characters, both male and female. And it's set in a period of time, 1920 Texas, that I knew nothing about. And I felt when I was done that I had come away really learning something that not only was fascinating for me, but really resonated now with what we've all been dealing with. So congratulations. I'm glad there might be other historical fiction in your future, but let's just relish this one now.
Thank you so much, Kate. I appreciate you doing this. Good to see you. It's
Good
been
to
so
see
long.
you too.
And I'm going to say our goodbyes from Book Carnival with the side statement that next year, for the next book, whatever it may be, let's hope we can do an event together in person.
Absolutely.
For both of you, it makes such a difference. I agree with you. My customers are dying to be back in the store and be able to meet someone and talk to them face to face. You're so right about how you feel about them and they you.
Oh,
Thank you again so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
This was recorded. This will go on site for people to see who weren't able to be here with us. So thank you again, Kate White, and especially Sandra Brown.
Bye, everyone. Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.